The night nurse gave the Mafia boss's son the same bill as everyone else, and by morning, the entire hospital knew her name. Sera Whitfield had been a nurse for 4 years. 4 years of double shifts and cold coffee and watching administrators smile at the wrong people. She had learned early that Cook County Memorial was not a place where fairness came naturally. It was a place where fairness had to be insisted upon, loudly, by someone who wasn't afraid of the consequences. She had always been that someone. On the night it started, she was 45 minutes into a 12-hour shift when the ambulance brought him in. The boy was 19, maybe 20, with the kind of jawline that suggested he had never been told no in his life. His left arm was wrapped in a temporary pressure bandage, bleeding through the gauze in a slow, dark bloom, knife wound, shallow. The paramedics had noted possible alcohol involvement. He had been conscious the whole ride over, they said, and had spent most of it on his phone. He was still on his phone when Sera walked into Bay 3. "I need to get out of here in an hour," he said, not looking up. "Tell whoever's in charge." Sera pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. "I'm in charge of your care right now. Can you tell me your name?" "Kieran." He said it like it was obvious, like she should have already known. "Last name?" He looked up then. He had pale green eyes and the kind of expression that came from being deferred to for so long that expectation had calcified into personality. "You don't know who I am? I know you have a laceration on your left forearm that's going to need stitching," Sera said. "Everything else is secondary." Something shifted in his expression, not offense exactly, but the early warning sign of it. He looked her over with a slow, evaluating patience that she recognized. She had seen it before, in different faces. The look of someone deciding how much effort it would take to make you regret the way you were speaking to them. "My father is going to hear about this," he said. Sera began unwrapping the temporary bandage. "Your father is welcome to call the patient services line. Right now, I need you to keep your arm still." She stitched him cleanly. 7 sutures, wound irrigation, tetanus booster, standard paperwork, standard discharge instructions. She did not rush, she did not fawn. When she handed him the discharge packet, she asked him, with the same tone she used for every patient, whether he had someone who could drive him home. He didn't answer. He took the papers and walked out. She thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. She heard his name for the first time the following morning. Dr. Pierce, the floor supervisor, found her at the SIN station before handoff. He had the look of a man delivering news he didn't want to deliver. Shoulders slightly forward, eyes not quite meeting hers. "The Calloway family has submitted a formal complaint," he said. "Patient in Bay 3 last night. They're claiming the care was inadequate." Sera looked at him. The wound was properly irrigated and sutured. Discharge instructions were provided verbally and in writing. His vitals were stable. "I know that." "Then the complaint is without merit." Pierce pressed his mouth into a line. "Sera, do you know who Kieran Calloway's father is?" She hadn't until that moment. But she understood from the way Pierce said it, careful, almost apologetic, that she was supposed to be concerned. That his father was the kind of man whose name, when dropped into a conversation, was meant to change the weight of everything around it. "It doesn't change the care I provided," she said. Pierce lowered his voice. "His father is Preston Calloway. He controls the distribution network for half the freight coming into this city. He has 3 board members on speed dial and has personally funded the new cardiac wing." He paused. "The complaint asks for your suspension pending review." The nursing station hummed around them. Monitors beeped. Down the hall, a patient called for water. The world kept moving, indifferent to the particular unfairness being assembled inside it. "Are you suspending me?" Sera asked. "Not yet," Pierce said, "but I need you to understand the situation." "I do understand it," she said. "I treated his son exactly the way I would treat anyone else who came into this hospital. If that's a problem, it's not a problem I caused." Pierce left. Sera finished her charting. She drove home in the grey early morning and sat at her kitchen table for a long time, looking at nothing. She had known, in some abstract way, that moments like this existed, that there were people in this city who operated by a different set of rules, whose reach extended into places most people never thought about. She had just never expected to be standing directly in the path of it. She made coffee. She went to bed. She set her alarm and told herself she wasn't afraid. She was a little afraid. 2 days passed, then a third. On the fourth morning, she was leaving the hospital parking garage when a black SUV pulled slowly alongside her. Not aggressive. Deliberate. The kind of slow that said, "We have all the time in the world and you don't." The window came down. The man behind it was large, suited, with cropped grey at his temples and an expression that communicated nothing at all. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, as she stopped walking. "Yes, Mr. Calloway would like a word." She looked at him, then at the SUV, then back at him. "Is that an invitation or a requirement?" The man almost smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Calloway doesn't usually make the distinction. Sera thought about calling someone, about walking back into the hospital and pretending this hadn't happened. She thought about every rational reason to decline, and she stood in the cool morning air, weighing them against something less rational, the feeling that walking away from this would not actually make it go away. "I need to be back by 2, she said. "I have a shift." "Noted," the man said, and opened the door. The drive was 40 minutes, mostly expressway, through neighborhoods that grew progressively quieter and more expensive. The SUV smelled like leather and something faintly antiseptic, which she found almost funny. Nobody spoke to her. She watched the city change outside the tinted window and kept her hands still in her lap, because stillness was the thing she had learned to project when the ground felt uncertain. They stopped in front of a building that wasn't quite a house and wasn't quite an office. A converted industrial structure on the near north side, all dark brick and steel-framed windows, behind a wall that was just high enough to suggest privacy without announcing security. A man opened the gate before they reached it. Someone had been watching. Inside, the building was unexpectedly warm. There was art on the walls, real art, not the kind selected by a decorator, and the floors were dark-stained concrete, and the light came from sources she couldn't quite identify. It felt strangely lived in. She was shown into a room with 2 chairs and a low table, and a view of an internal courtyard where late-season plants were growing in large ceramic pots. Someone had been taking care of them. The soil looked freshly turned. She sat down, she waited. Preston Calloway came in without announcement. He was taller than she expected, though she hadn't had a clear picture of what to expect. He wore a grey sweater and dark trousers, and looked less like the man she had been imagining. Something sharp-edged and threatening, and more like someone who had been awake for too many hours, and had long since stopped pretending otherwise. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, with dark hair going silver at the temples, the same pale green eyes as his son, and the bearing of someone who had been making difficult decisions for so long that the weight of it had settled permanently into his posture. He sat down across from her without extending his hand. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said. "Mr. Calloway, do you know why you're here? I assume because your son received a bill instead of an apology." Something moved across his face. "Not amusement exactly. Recognition, maybe. My son told me you were rude to him." "I was direct with him," Sera said. "There's a difference, though I understand why he might not know it." Calloway looked at her for a moment. "He said you didn't know who he was." "I knew he had a knife wound that needed suturing. That was what mattered. And now that you know who he is, it still doesn't change the care I provided." He was quiet. The courtyard outside the window held its stillness. Somewhere deeper in the building, a door closed softly. "My son," Preston Calloway said, with the measured, careful precision of someone choosing each word with intent, "has been accommodated his entire life by people who were afraid of me. Teachers, coaches, hospital administrators." A pause. "The assistant principal at his high school changed a grade he had legitimately failed because someone explained to her who paid for the gymnasium." Sera said nothing. "He is 20 years old," Calloway continued, "and he has never once encountered a consequence he could not be extracted from. Do you understand what that does to a person?" "Yes," she said quietly. "I do." He looked at her then, fully looked at her, the way people rarely did, like he was actually trying to understand something rather than simply assess it. "The complaint will be withdrawn," he said, "this morning, if it hasn't been already." She hadn't expected that. She kept her expression neutral, but something in her chest unclenched almost involuntarily. "My son's behavior in your care was inappropriate," he said. "I've spoken to him about it." "With respect," Sera said, "speaking to him about it isn't the same as having him experience a consequence." Calloway's eyes sharpened. "Excuse me?" She had said it before she fully decided to say it, and now she had to live in it. "He came in at 2 in the morning with a knife wound and alcohol in his system and spent the first 10 minutes of his care telling me who his father was. That's not a behavior problem. That's a belief system. And a conversation with you isn't going to change a belief system." The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind. Calloway set his forearms on his knees and leaned forward slightly, and she became aware, in a purely physical, unemotional way, that this was a man who was accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any room he entered, not because of his size or his expression, but because of some quality in his stillness, something that said he had learned long ago not to waste movement. "What would change it?" he asked. The question was genuine, she heard it. "He needs to fail at something," she said, "and not be rescued." Calloway sat back. The courtyard light shifted as a cloud moved outside. For a moment the room felt very still, and Sera thought about all the possible ways this conversation could go wrong, and then she thought about the boy in Bay 3 and the way he had looked at her. That slow, assessing look, and she thought, "This is not actually about me. This is about him. The complaint is withdrawn," Calloway said again after a moment. "You'll receive a formal notice from hospital administration today. Thank you. Don't thank me. It was never a legitimate complaint." She stood. He stood. She was nearly at the door when he said, "You're not what I expected." She turned. "What did you expect?" "Someone who would be more careful," he said. She considered that. "I am careful," she said. "I'm just not afraid." The drive back was quieter than the drive out. The same man drove. The same silence held, but something about it felt different. Lighter, or at least less pressurized, like air after a storm has passed through and not quite arrived. Sera looked out the window and thought about the courtyard, the carefully tended plants, the freshly turned soil. Someone in that house was paying attention to small things, which seemed somehow inconsistent with everything else. She got back to the hospital at 1:47. She had 13 minutes before her shift. She went to the locker room, changed, washed her hands, and stood at the sink looking at herself in the mirror for a moment. Her hands were steady. She went to work. The formal notice arrived by email at 3 that afternoon, copied to Pierce and the patient services director. The complaint had been withdrawn. The review was closed. No further action required. Pierce found her on the floor an hour later and said quietly, "I don't know what you did." "I didn't do anything," Sera said. "I just didn't undo anything either." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't quite classify. Then he walked away. She thought again that that was the end of it. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, Kieran Calloway came back. Not as a patient. He came in through the main entrance in a clean jacket, without the phone in his hand, and asked at the front desk for Sera Whitfield. The receptionist paged her. She came down from the floor expecting a problem, and found him standing near the waiting room chairs, looking out of place and approximately 3 times less certain of himself than he had been the last time she'd seen him. He had the look of someone who had been told to do something difficult and was in the process of doing it badly. "I wanted to apologize," he said before she could speak. She studied him. "Okay, I was." He stopped, started again. "I was an ass, and I made a complaint that wasn't real, because I was embarrassed that you didn't care who I was." He said it fast, like he was trying to get through it before he changed his mind. "My dad told me you said I'd never experienced a consequence." "He wasn't. He didn't say it like you were wrong." Sera was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate you saying that." "He made me come," Kieran admitted. "But I also wanted to." He paused. "I'm not sure which one is true. Both can be true at the same time," she said. He looked at her. He was younger than he had seemed in Bay 3. She could see it now, without the performance of arrogance layered over everything. He was just a kid who had grown up in a strange country where the rules were different from everyone else's, and had never learned to navigate the territory outside its borders. "Is there anything?" he started. "No," she said, not unkindly. "There's nothing you owe me. You apologized. That's enough for now." He nodded. He left. She stood in the lobby for a moment after he went, watching the automatic doors close behind him. Outside, through the glass, she could see a car waiting. Dark, expensive, but Preston Calloway was not inside it. She went back upstairs. The next time she saw him, she was not at work. It was a Saturday, which meant she was at the farmer's market on Milwaukee Avenue, because she had been going to the farmer's market on Milwaukee Avenue every Saturday for 3 years, and she had not yet allowed a Mafia boss to disrupt the rhythm of her weekends. She was holding a paper bag of sweet potatoes and a cup of bad coffee when she turned a corner between stalls and nearly walked directly into Preston Calloway's chest. He looked as surprised as she did, which was satisfying. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said. "Mr. Calloway." She looked at the heirloom tomatoes in his hand. "Those are from the wrong vendor," she said, before she could stop herself. "The ones on the end are better." He looked down at the tomatoes, then at her. "Are they? Grown in the same county? Less time on the truck." There was a pause during which Sera became aware of how absurd this was, standing in the middle of a farmer's market correcting Preston Calloway's tomato selection, and also how entirely incapable she was of behaving differently in the face of it. "Show me," he said. She walked him to the end vendor. She pointed. He bought a different bag of tomatoes. They stood between the stalls in the weak autumn sunlight, and she drank her bad coffee, and he didn't leave. "Kieran told me he came to see you," he said. "He did. Did it seem genuine to you?" She thought about it honestly. It seemed like someone who was trying to be genuine and wasn't entirely sure how yet, which is different from not trying. Calloway looked at the middle distance. "He enrolled in a community college course," he said. "Without my involvement. Didn't tell me until after he registered. That's good. He's also working a shift at a restaurant on weekends, his own idea." A pause. "He doesn't know I know." Sera looked at him. There was something in the way he said it, careful and quiet, like he was protecting something fragile. That was very different from the man she had sat across from in the room with the courtyard. Or maybe it was the same man, and the courtyard had already told her something she hadn't known how to read. "You're proud of him," she said. He didn't answer immediately. "I'm relieved," he finally said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" He looked at her then, and the expression on his face was not the guarded, evaluating thing she had seen in the building on the near north side. It was something simpler, more undefended. "Yes," he said. "Pride is about me. Relief is about him." She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "You think about these distinctions." "I have a lot of time to think," he said. "Most of what I do is best done while other people are asleep." The implication of that was not lost on her, and she didn't pretend it was. "And yet you're at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning." "I'm trying something different," he said. She finished her coffee. The market moved around them, ordinary and unhurried. People with strollers, a dog on a leash, a child pointing at pumpkins. The kind of scene that existed in a different orbit from everything she associated with Preston Calloway, and yet here he was, standing in the middle of it, holding a bag of tomatoes he hadn't known he needed until 12 minutes ago. "I have to finish shopping," she said. "Of course." He didn't move. "Mrs. Whitfield." She paused. "What you said to my son," he said, "about not being rescued." He looked at her steadily. "Nobody has said anything like that to me in a long time either. She didn't know what to do with that, so she didn't try to do anything with it. She just held it, the way she held a lot of things, carefully without grasping. Maybe that's something to think about," she said. "I already am," he said. She walked away between the stalls in the thin Saturday light, her bag of sweet potatoes in one hand and an empty coffee cup in the other. And she did not look back, because she had learned long ago that looking back was how you lost your footing. But she was aware of him behind her in the way you are aware of weather. not looking at it, just knowing it's there, feeling the particular quality of the air it changes around you. She got home and put the sweet potatoes on the counter and stood in her kitchen for a while without doing anything useful. She thought about the courtyard plants. She thought about relief is about him. She thought about a man who ran freight operations through half the city's infrastructure standing in the thin autumn light, asking her to show him the better tomatoes and doing it without a trace of irony. She thought about the way he had said, "I'm trying something different." She had spent 4 years in a profession that required her to understand people quickly, to read what they weren't saying, to hear through what they were performing. It was not a skill she could turn off when she walked out of the hospital, and what she understood about Preston Calloway standing in that market was something that surprised her. He was lonely, not in a simple way, not in a way he would name or likely even acknowledge, but in the way that people are lonely, who have spent so long being the most powerful presence in any room that they have forgotten what it feels like to be treated like an ordinary person who might need to be corrected about tomatoes. She put the kettle on. She did not call anyone. She did not tell anyone what had happened, because there was nothing to tell. Nothing had happened, not technically. A man had bought better tomatoes because she had told him where to find them. That was all. But she sat with her tea and she thought, something is starting. And then she thought, be careful. And then, underneath that, quiet and inconvenient. But don't be afraid. He texted her the following Thursday. She didn't know how he had her number, and then she did know how he had her number, and she decided not to think about it too carefully. The tomatoes were significantly better. Thank you. She stared at the message for longer than was warranted. Then she typed, told you so. There was a pause of approximately 40 seconds. Would you be willing to have coffee sometime? Not a meeting, not anything official, just coffee. She read it twice. She thought about all the reasons to say no. She thought about Kieran Calloway enrolling in a community college course without his father's help, working a restaurant shift on weekends, trying to find the edge of his own shape without someone else defining it for him. She thought about a man who made distinctions between pride and relief. She typed, Saturday, the bad coffee place on Milwaukee, 9 o'clock. He wrote back, the bad coffee place? She wrote, you'll see. She set her phone down. She looked out the window at the Chicago evening, blue and cooling, the last light going out of the sky in long horizontal bands. She was a nurse. She had 4 years of double shifts and cold coffee, and the particular kind of courage that came from caring for people who were frightened and in pain. She was not the kind of person who walked into situations without thinking them through. She had thought this one through. She was not afraid.